Yesterday, Pam Jeffries, our president, along with Ian Curran, our keynote speaker, both mentioned concepts in disruption and concepts in people who are restless and want to change and create change. And many times in the simulation community, we think of disruption as a new technology that's emerged, or a new piece of equipment, or a new curriculum innovation that is helping us create better healthcare providers. Sometimes I think that we skip over sometimes the contribution of the true business leaders, and it is sometimes their innovative spirit, their disruptive spirit. They're occasionally acting like an adolescent or a teenager to move balls forward and create change. It's my pleasure now to introduce a gentleman who has been exceptionally kind to the society, and certainly is one of the business disruptive innovators that has led to advancements in the community of simulation. Lou, if you could start making your way up here. Mr. Lou Oberndorf endowed a lecture for the society a number of years ago. The Lou Oberndorf Lecture on Innovation in Healthcare Simulation was made possible by a gift from the Lou and Rosemary Oberndorf Charitable Fund. Lou is the founder and chairman of Medical Education Technology, or MEDI, which was a worldwide leader in medical education and educational software, and now you know it as CAE Healthcare. And Mr. Oberndorf has been exceptionally generous to the society, as I've mentioned, and been very, very generous over the years in both mentoring part of our mission forward, as well as financially supporting things like this morning's lecture in an endowed way. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Lou Oberndorf.
Good morning. Paul, thank you for those kind words. And I would like to thank the leadership of the Society for its generosity in allowing me and giving me the honor of introducing the speaker this morning. I'd also like to thank the Planning Committee. We met last year, and I challenged them to do something and introduce a speaker and continue the progress that we've made in this lecture series and to meet its goals. The purpose of the lecture series, as we envisioned it, was to really to emulate and to continue the guiding principles that we followed from the beginning of MEDI. And those were to, and I think that Paul really echoed some of those comments, is that we always challenged the status quo. We were always prepared to disrupt and to be disrupted. And we heard those comments yesterday morning in terms of the disruption of technology, and I echo Paul's comments that disruption of technology or disruption of how we do things isn't necessarily a new, as my English friends call it, a new piece of kit. Disruption can come in many fashions. Industries can be disrupted, societies can be disrupted. And as I look at what we were able to accomplish and what this society, and I do congratulate all of you in what you've accomplished as a society. I'm old enough to have been around at the beginning with Dan Raymer. He's a lot older than I am. David Gaba, he's a lot taller than I am. But certainly at the beginning of the society, as it grew out of the early professional groups within anesthesia and moving into healthcare. This society, you in this room, have always been disruptors. It's in your nature. Going back 15 years ago, those of you in the room that made a decision to adopt this kind of technology and improving healthcare education put your careers at risk each and every time. That's the element of a disruptor. And the purpose of this lecture, the challenge of this lecture, is to make sure that we as a society, we as a community, never fall into the trap of success. the trap of success to me, and always has been, is complacency. We become complacent in how well we've done, and we begin to recede from challenging the status quo. So my challenge to the committee in this lecture series was to always pick a speaker, choose a speaker, to come here and not only present new ideas and what is happening in the area of education, cognitive science, technology, and what have you, but to challenge us to continue to reach that kind of frontier that we started with some 15 years ago in this industry, but also to continue it in this society. Well, they've done it. They've done it again, and I want to thank the Planning Committee for doing that. Dr. Gary Klein received his PhD in experimental psychology in 1969. He founded his own company. He's an innovator, and he's a businessman, but he's also a scientist. He has done some extraordinary work in developing models of cognitive process. And I believe that we're at a stage in our society and where we're at in this science, and that is we really are now exploring the cognitive aspects. Last year's speaker covered those subjects as well. But that's the real challenge. The exhibit floor is full of technology, bits of kit. And I certainly don't need to denigrate them at all, but it is really now the next level. How we deal with it, how we debrief, how we assess, how we deal with risk. And Dr. Klein is a pioneer in that work. And I couldn't be more proud to introduce our speaker. But before I bring him to the room, I do want to tell you about his latest publication. It is the Seeing What Others Don't, the Remarkable Ways We Gain Insight. And it is available on Amazon. So with that, please welcome Dr. Gary Klein to the.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate being invited. And I hope I'll have some useful things to provide to you in my talk. I don't work in the area of healthcare simulation. It's not my field. I'm a cognitive psychologist. That's the perspective I'm going to bring. I had a small brush with the area of simulation way back early in my career in 1974. And just by luck, I happened to land at the right place at the right time. I landed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where I worked as a research psychologist for 4 years, from 74 to 78, and then I started my own company. And my branch was working in simulation, which had always been a sort of a sleepy, off-to-the-side area because pilots didn't really want to spend time in simulators. They became pilots to fly airplanes. And so one part of our division was developing new methods for flight simulation. Our part was looking at the pedagogy of it, how to develop the training methods to go along with the technology. And 1974 was the right time for me to get there because in 1973, the Arab oil embargo had hit. And all of a sudden, the price of fuel went sky high. And now all these pilots who loved to be able to fly as much as they wanted were not able to fly as much as they wanted. They were stuck. And they had to get training somehow, and it wasn't going to be in the air. And it was going to be in those simulators. And they had nothing but contempt for simulators. And they were very unhappy with the card that they had been dealt. And so all of a sudden, our group, from a sleepy little outpost sort of developing this speculative technology, became kind of important because we had to figure out how the simulators could be used to allow them to achieve competence, a kind of competence that they had achieved before by flying in the air. And I got interested not just in how do they achieve competence, but could they become experts? And that raised the question of what is an expert and how do you achieve it, and then definitely how do you achieve it in a simulation? And that's one of the issues I followed for the rest of my career. So it was a great way to get introduced to that with an audience that wasn't the happiest audience about the message that we were trying to deliver. So what does an expert have to know? Well, codifying what I learned then and what I've learned since, I would argue that an expert needs a variety of different types of knowledge. And I'm illustrating it with this diagram. So there's knowledge that's explicit that you see at the top of the diagram. There's things like facts that experts have to know. In your field, facts would be if you have a patient who's 65 years old and overweight and having some high cholesterol and a horrible family history of heart problems, and you want to administer statins, what level of statin, what dosage do you apply? There are facts, there are clear facts that will guide you in what that should be. And so that can be taught. Second type of explicit knowledge is knowledge of rules. How do you insert a central line without creating a risk of infection? And there's checklists for doing that. And those checklists have been extremely valuable. And so they're another target for building simulations so that people can learn the right kind of procedures and perform them well. But there's also stuff underneath the surface where we don't see it very well, and that's in the area of tacit knowledge, and that's where expertise lurks, because lots of people can learn facts and procedures, but experts have to learn about the facts. They have to learn about the procedures, how to apply them, when to apply them, how to apply them if there are conflicting pressures and conflicting procedures, and how do they make those kinds of trade-offs. And so the knowledge that intrigues me is the tacit knowledge underneath the surface, where it's hard to gain access to it. Knowledge might be something like pattern recognition. A senior nurse walking through a neonatal intensive care unit, looking at one of the neonates, noticing that there had been a heel stick and the blood hadn't coagulated. And when was the heel stick done? So she looks at the record. It was done about 15 minutes ago. Should be coagulating by now. So now she's looking and she's seeing that there's been a small but a consistent temperature drop over the last 4 or 5 hours. Okay, and then she's also noting that the baby seems sort of lethargic. Putting it all together, she says, this feels like a baby that may be developing sepsis. And so we better start watching it more carefully and maybe even initiating some antibiotics. She puts all those together. No one of them would indicate the need for antibiotics, but she sees the pattern and she's ready to act on it. Another type of tacit knowledge is just perceptual discrimination, seeing things that others don't. Making recognition. A friend of mine told me when he was early in his career, he was caring for a patient, and there were a bunch of tests being done. He was sorting out what's going wrong, and then his mentor, a senior physician, stopped in to see how he was doing, walked into the room, hadn't even gotten past the doorway, looked at the patient, and said, "Oh, looks like he's having a heart attack, a myocardial infarction. I may be wrong, but it's just the way it seems to me." And of course, that's what was happening. And my friend, that was one of his possibilities. He was teasing it out. He was trying to reason it out. He was trying to go through all the decision trees. This other physician just looked at the patient's face and said, "I think I know what's going on." That's a perceptual skill. And that perceptual skill comes with the ability to judge typicality. I've seen this before. I've seen it enough times before to be able to recognize a pattern. Or to be able to say, I've never seen this before. It's an anomaly, and I better do something about it. That's another aspect of expertise. And then the last aspect of expertise on this diagram has to do with mental models. And in the healthcare world, mental models may be used in a slightly different way than we use it in psychology. We're not talking about creating a record, modeling something by articulating it. For us, mental models are the set of beliefs we hold about how things work. A set of beliefs, this causes that causes the other thing, and we put them together and we have a rough idea about how things happen in the body, how things happen with the equipment, and we kind of sort all that out, and we have a sense of the way things are going on. And that's also, it's hard for us to say what our mental model is, but we have these mental models and we use them in order to do our work. So these are the kinds of knowledge underneath the waterline where they're not really visible. They're tacit knowledge. I can't tell you my mental model. I can't tell you what I see when I look at a patient across the room if I was a skilled physician. I can't tell you what's gone into the pattern, but I have those skills, I have those abilities. I think that's where expertise resides. And what I want to talk about is how to get these sorts of factors more firmly embedded in simulation in healthcare. It's easy to do the stuff above the line. It's easier to do simulations that help people learn facts and procedures. Challenge that strikes me is to try to use the simulation to build all kinds of expertise and to do it systematically and effectively. So how does this work in a real-world situation? Let me give you an example from about 4 years ago. You all probably remember it. It's the Miracle on the Hudson. This is the example of Sully Sullenberger, takes off, simple flight, takes off from LaGuardia, and all of a sudden he hits a flock of geese, and now he doesn't have any engine power. Not part of the flight plan. Now, instead of flying an airplane with thrust, he's flying a glider. That is not really configured as a glider. And the date was January 15th. The whole episode, from the time he hit the birds until he landed on the Hudson, took about 3.5 minutes. And so how did he do it? How do you make a decision like that with lots of uncertainty and time pressure? Well, there's procedures, there's rules. First option, any pilot knows if you run into trouble, is return to the airport that you took off from. So that was Sullenberger's, that was his first impulse. He gets on the radio, contacts the air traffic controllers and tells them I need to go back to LaGuardia. They scramble to be able to get him clearance to get back to LaGuardia. That's the obvious thing to do, the right thing to do, and they're working on that. And then he radios him and says, I can't make it. But he's already taken off, he's headed north, and now he's made a left-hand turn. So his next option is, maybe there's an airport in the direction I'm heading that I can land on, like Teterboro, New Jersey. So he says, can you vector me and get me landed at Teterboro? So again, they spring into action to try to get him access to Teterboro as he's heading west towards New Jersey. Teterboro is up to the challenge. They're ready for him. And as he's moving closer, he realizes, I can't make that either. It's too far away. I wasn't high enough and I wasn't moving fast enough. I'm not going to get there. There's a third option, and he was sort of aware of it at the beginning, but he didn't really think he wanted to do it, which is to land on the Hudson River. And if you're a pilot, you don't love to land on rivers for a couple of reasons. One of them, especially in the winter in January, they tend to be cold and wet, and you're not sure everybody can get out safely. Plus, there's a high risk because if there's any kind of wind, you don't even need a huge wind. You just need some choppiness in the water, and all that has to happen is a little wave comes up as you're coming in and hits a wingtip. And now instead of coming in with a smooth landing, one of your wings has hit the water, the other one hasn't, and you're cartwheeling. And that doesn't do much for your configuration and landing. So you don't want to land in the river, but he didn't think he had any other options. That's what he did. So that's how he made his decision. He landed on the Hudson River, made it a safe landing. We've all seen the pictures and the people lined up on the wings, ready to be rescued. So that's what he did. What didn't he do? What he didn't do was the classic model of decision maker. He didn't set up a matrix. He didn't say, let's see, these are my options. These are the strengths and weaknesses, and which comes out ahead. He didn't go through that kind of drill. He didn't have to, because he could use his skill to figure out what to do. And in fact, his strategy maps very nicely with the strategy we had worked out with firefighters about 20 years earlier, called a recognition prime decision strategy. And the strategy simply says, when you become skilled, you see a situation, and you don't have to randomly generate lots of options. Your experience base has given you a repertoire of patterns. And so you activate those patterns, and each pattern tells you these are the important cues. You know what to pay attention to and what you can ignore. Pattern tells you what to expect so that you can be smooth. But also, if you know what to expect and the expectancy is violated, it suggests maybe I got the wrong pattern. I got to rethink it. Pattern tells you what's a plausible goal, so you know what you should be trying to do. And the pattern tells you these are the kinds of actions that will get the job done. So almost immediately, you have some ideas about how to get the job done, and you have a range of patterns that you've learned from experience, and you activate those, and within seconds, you get a pattern match. And now that pattern match puts you in business, and you know what you're supposed to do. But intuition can sometimes mislead us. So how do you evaluate your decisions in this kind of a situation? And when we did this research back in the mid-'80s, and we found that the firefighters used this pattern matching strategy. But the way they evaluate, how do you evaluate an option except by comparing it to others to see which is best? Well, it turned out, by listening to them, looking at what they had done, they evaluated it by imagining it. It's like popping a DVD into a player, and they would do a mental simulation. They'd say, if I do this action, here's what'll happen. And if they like what they see, then they're ready. And in just a few seconds, they're able to make a good decision. If they don't like what they see, then they say, I need to modify it so that I can overcome some of the flaws. And if I can't modify it, then I've got to go back and try something else in my response queue, in my repertoire, to find another way of doing business. And so this is a recognition prime strategy. It doesn't say always trust your intuition, because intuition can sometimes mislead us. It says use your intuition to judge what's going on, and then use this mental simulation that's a form of analysis to test and improve the options that you come up with. And so that's the strategy that we see most people using in time-pressured and uncertain environments. This is a strategy Sullenberger used to land his airplane. But let's go back to Sullenberger. There's a critical decision he made based on tacit knowledge. And there are a number, but there was one that caught my eye. And that was his decision when he said he was going to go back to LaGuardia. He was going to return to the airport. And air traffic controller we loved that. They were getting ready for him to land. And then he said, I can't make it. And listening to the tapes, he said, I can't make it 40 seconds after he hit the geese. So he had 40 seconds to make that judgment. How do you make a judgment like that? You can calculate it, right? So I've taken off, and I'm going. I know my airspeed. I know, my angle of climb. I know my heading, and now I've got to imagine I'm making my left turn, and so I'm going to lose some altitude. But then I've got to make another left turn to go back past LaGuardia, because of the way the winds are. And as I'm going, because I'm not a great glider, they don't really build these commercial airliners to be wonderful gliders. I'm sinking a bit. And then I've got to make another left turn. I'm going to lose more altitude. And then a final left turn to be able to return from the original direction. And you do all of that, and you can calculate he'll never get back. How long does it take to calculate that? Could you calculate it if we gave you all the equations and we gave you 10 minutes? Could you come up with those calculations? I'm not sure. Maybe some of you could. Maybe we could speed it up if we said, you don't have to do it in your head. We'll give you a calculator. So I'm imagining Sullenberger getting on the radio to his passengers. Anybody have a calculator? bring it up like right now. I know there's a seatbelt sign on. Forget about the seatbelt sign. We really could use one. And maybe he could shorten it from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes. But that's not enough because the whole episode took 3.5 minutes by the time he hit the birds until he was in the Hudson. He could look at the situation and using his mental model and his sense of typicality, right away he knew this was not feasible. And that's a form of tacit knowledge, to know how long things take so that you can use that knowledge as you're staging your behaviors and as you're deciding whether certain actions are feasible or not feasible. That's the kind of tacit knowledge and expertise that I think would really help build stronger simulations in healthcare to teach people those sorts of factors about themselves. I'm not criticizing the value of procedures. Procedures are extremely important. They help you train novices. They help you remember things. They guard against interruption. For example, much as the admiration I have for Sullenberger, I know how important flight checklists are when pilots get on airplanes because you've got air traffic controllers talking to them, dispatchers talking to them. It's one thing to start, but it's very easy to forget things, and that's why the checklists are there to help people remember. If Sullenberger, one of my heroes, was flying a plane and I was on the plane and I heard him mention as he got on board, you know, I forgot all my flight checklists in the ready room, but I've been flying so long, I don't need them. I think I would get off that plane. I need a pilot to have those checklists and those procedures because I'm not underestimating their value. I'm just saying that procedures, for all their value, work well in situations that are repetitive, in well-ordered situations. They start to become brittle and fall apart when we move into more complex and dynamic environments. Diagrammatically, in a well-ordered environment, a lot of the procedures that we want to mandate make great amount of sense. The trouble for folks like you is you don't just live your lives and continue all your work in the well-ordered part of this spectrum. A lot of your work is in the complex and sometimes even the chaotic part. And there the procedures and checklists aren't enough. What's needed is the stuff below the line, the tacit knowledge that you build up with expertise. And that's why it's so important to build that tacit knowledge, if you can, using simulations so people are ready for it. So that's what I'm calling the difference between Transformation 1 and Transformation 2. And that's why I labeled this talk Transformation 2. For me, Transformation 1 is an essential transformation if you have data, if you have scientific research, all kinds of findings. That's the beginning of a technology and a science of healthcare. But that's not enough because you can't just say, here's the research and it's in the library and we can make the articles available. That has to be transformed into a form that people can use. Best practices, checklists, procedures. This is the whole area of evidence-based medicine. So I'm referring to this as Transformation 1, taking the existing evidence and turning them into tools that people can apply in order to accomplish best practices. But the best practices only go so far. They go until you start getting into complex situations where there are trade-offs and boundary conditions, and you have to determine which best practice and is the best practice still working and does it have to be modified. And this is where you need to move and develop expertise, and I'm referring to that as Transformation 2. And Transformation 2 is going and developing the proficiency to achieve adaptive expertise. And that's a challenge for anybody in any area, and I want to raise it here in this society, to develop simulations in healthcare that can help people move into Transformation 2 and develop the necessary expertise. So how do you do it? There are lots of ways to do it. I'm just going to describe a few that I have some familiarity with. First one is a project that I have some knowledge about. It's about identifying sepsis in children. This is a project done in Cincinnati, team led by Mary Patterson. And the idea is the team learned to use cognitive task analysis to get at tacit knowledge for skilled physicians who were able to pick up early signs, make perceptual discriminations and see patterns that would indicate sepsis, not in neonates, but in children. Because this is a very dangerous situation when it arises. You want to capture it as quickly as possible. So the team of researchers learned cognitive task analysis methods, did a variety of interviews, codified many of the things they learned, and tried to inject what they learned into a simulation for healthcare for training. And so some of the things they learned had to do with bradycardia, tachycardia, temperature, things like that. Mental status changes could be injected into the simulation using voice modulators. Things like delayed capillary refill. That's a sign. It was really hard to get that into a simulation, and so they had a supplementary video showing what that looked like when it was delayed enough to serve as an indicator, as part of the indicator that sepsis was being developed. So we heard some of the cues were that the patients would have cold feet. Well, that's hard to simulate with a dummy. So one of the researchers cut off the feet and then put it in a bath of ice water. And then before a trainee came on, reattached the feet. So there was a dummy with cold feet ready as a cue if the person identified it. And then there was a test. There was a test of 18 physicians to see how accurate they were before any training, how accurate they were at picking up signs of sepsis. The answer was not tremendously accurate for some of these really subtle cases. They only picked up about 33%. And so this it demonstrated the need for a program like this, and this program is now being instantiated for first-year pediatric residents. That's an example of transformation 2, of going below the line into the tacit knowledge and trying to make as much of the tacit knowledge available for training. Second example. This is not medical. This comes from an episode with a friend of mine named Doug Harrington. Doug Harrington is a Navy pilot. He's a great Navy pilot, really highly skilled. And being a pilot in the Navy isn't just about taking off and landing an airplane. You've got to take off and land an airplane on an aircraft carrier. And an aircraft carrier is bouncing up and down, it's moving with the waves, it's moving behind you, it's changing your angle, and you've got to sort of catch up with it and get yourself lined up. And they have people on the aircraft carrier. There's a senior landing signal officer who's watching you and telling you how to adjust your angle and whether you can land or not, because this is a really difficult skill. Doug loved it. He had a great time doing it. He became an instructor pilot. He flew F-4s. Now, those of you with Navy experience know that this is not a picture of an F-4, so I apologize for that. We needed a picture of a Navy-looking airplane with an aircraft carrier someplace below that looked kind of scary. So this is the picture we have. This is not an F-4. So that was the way Doug operated, and he did so well. He was an instructor pilot. He taught others to do it, and they said, okay, Doug, time for you to graduate from an F-4 to an A-6, which is a more sophisticated airplane. Piece of cake for Doug. He learns how to fly it, gets the skill, and then he's told, yeah, you know how to fly it. Now we've got to just knock out the carrier landings. You do 6 landings today, and then we'll do 4 at night, and then you'll be qualified. And so everything is moving smoothly. Everything's working out for Doug. And he's coming in for his first landing, and he's perfectly lined up. This is going to be so easy. He's perfectly lined up. And the landing signal officer says, come right, come right. That doesn't make any sense to Doug, because he knows he's perfectly lined up.
So he does what any skilled Navy pilot would do under those circumstances. He ignores the LSO because he knows he's right. And he keeps coming in, and the LSO is saying, come right, and then eventually the LSO waves him off, won't let him land. And now Doug has to increase his altitude and do for a go-around. And he's thinking, that's weird. What just happened? It's perfectly lined up. So he comes in again for a second try, and he gets it perfectly lined up, and he's told, come right, come right. So he figured, I better do something just to show the guy I'm listening to him. My radio isn't broken. So he comes right a little bit, not enough. He gets waved off again. Wow. This is not what's supposed to be happening to him. This is really bizarre. He doesn't know what this is about. Comes around for another try. And as he's coming around, he realizes this landing signal officer, he's probably got more patience than I have fuel. So maybe I need to listen to him a little more carefully than I. So he comes in and he says, come right. He comes right a little bit, comes right more, managed to get right, enough right that he's allowed to land, but it's a ragged landing. And all of his landings that day are ragged landings. And he's told, Doug, we're not going to let you do your nighttime landings because you really messed up your daytime landings so badly. We're going to repeat your daytime landings tomorrow. If you don't do a better job, that's it. That's the end of your flying career in the Navy. It's all over. And Doug is in shock. He loves flying. The morning started with such promise, and now his career is about to be over. Fortunately, his friends were there for him. And so for the rest of that evening, his friends were there, and they were giving him useful advice. They would come up to him, and they would say, Doug, you really need to bear down tomorrow. Oh, really? Doug, you have to really try hard. You have to pay attention. They were driving him crazy. And so by the end of that evening, he didn't want to talk to anybody. He was in a state of shock. He just wanted to go to sleep. Maybe he'll wake up and it'll be a dream and he can get on with it. As he's getting ready to go to sleep, there's a knock on the door. And Doug says, go away, because he doesn't want to hear anybody else. He's really in a state of panic. And the knock on the door, and the guy says, Doug, let me in. And Doug says, I don't want anybody telling me anything. And the guy says, I don't have anything I want to tell you. I just want to talk to you. And it's the landing signal officer. And this is a guy who's not in charge of mentoring or training Doug. He just wanted to be helpful. So Doug reluctantly lets him in and says, there's nothing you can tell me. And he said, I'm not here to tell you anything. Just want to ask you something. Just want to talk with you. So you were a great pilot, and you're having trouble today. What did you fly before this? And he said, well, I'm flying an A6 now. My previous plane was an A4. And he said, okay. And an A4, so you would land? He said, yeah, I land. I just land. I put the nose of the airplane on the center line, and I would land. I would have no trouble. And I'm doing that today, and you keep telling me come right. So it's your fault, The landing signal officer said, well, you actually weren't lined up well, so why not? So in the A6, it's one-seater, and if you fly with somebody else, the person is in front of you. So there's like a straight line from the nose to that person to your nose to the tail. Yeah, it's all one line. Well, what about an A6? Well, it's two people, so it's side by side, but it's only about like 1.5 feet away from the center line. How big a difference could that make? And the landing signal officer said, I think it could make a difference. And Doug said, nah, it's not going to make a difference. So the landing signal officer says, let's try this. Let's try this experiment. And I would like you to try it. I would like you to put yourself in the position of Doug Harrington. I would like you to extend your arm. That's your airplane. With your thumb up, that's the nose of your airplane. Close one eye, and I want you to align your nose with a vertical line someplace in this room. You're about to land your nose on that runway, whatever you have picked out. You got it? I can't see you. I'm assuming that you are all getting ready to land your thumb. Now, move your head 1.5 feet over to the left, which is where Doug was. and pull your thumb back over to the center line. And you see what happens, how much you pull your thumb over, and now you really have pulled and you're going way to the left. And Doug did this exercise, and he said, I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. That's what's been going wrong. And landing signals officers, yeah, I think that's it. And so the next day, Doug had no trouble. He nailed all his landings, and his flying career continued. I love this story because the landing signal officer wasn't a trainer. He was just trying to be helpful. He didn't go to give Doug any lectures. He came there as a colleague to open up a conversation and to try to understand what was wrong with Doug's thinking, because this was about Doug having some strange ideas. And there's two dynamics here, the two dynamics of failure. First dynamic is let's go to the second dynamic. People are mostly open to change when they have failed. If Doug's procedure had been working and he was doing acceptable landings, not great ones, but not terrible ones, he'd hold on to his mental model about putting the nose of the airplane on the center line. It worked for him up to then. Why would he change? He was only open to change when he hit this massive failure. And the massive failure, the second dynamic, is it surfaced a flaw in Doug's mental model. And that's what failures do. All of a sudden, beliefs you hold, as long as things are going well, you don't have to worry about those beliefs. But failures uncover those flaws in a way that almost nothing else does, and gives you an opportunity to surface it the way the landing signal officer did, and then to come up with some procedures like this thumb exercise in order to help the person realize it for themselves. So the landing signal officer didn't win an argument. He created an experience that allowed Doug to change his mental model. Okay, so mental models, which is the last part of the iceberg diagram at the bottom. Mental models are the ways we understand things. And what we can do with healthcare simulations is help people give up mental models so that they can see where the flaws are, and move to new and better mental models that are more accurate and more comprehensive. And that's a challenge to building simulations that allow people to move to and increase and improve their mental models and get rid of some of the flaws and acquire a better set of beliefs. Mental models are critical for gaining insight. You can do this the way the landing signal officer did, through cognitive debriefing. And the goals of cognitive debriefing, diagnose what's going wrong, making the tacit knowledge, the cues that usually don't get discussed, making them more visible to people, helping to motivate people to say, here's the way I can practice in the future. And there's various kinds of probes. You can probe about cues that people could be watching, or with hindsight, now that you know how it came out, what should you have been watching more carefully, so that people have that kind of feedback. Teamwork, you can look at teamwork dynamics, and you can look at just errors, and take advantage of errors, because you have a short window, an opportunity to use errors to find what the flaws in the beliefs are, so that the person can see it for him or herself and make the changes. One difficulty with cognitive debriefing is it requires the person who has just had some problems to be open about it. And that requires trust, because you're creating vulnerability. And here's some of the work of Jenny Rudolph and her associates, and I believe Jenny spoke here last year comes in about debriefing with good intention, debriefing with good judgment, about creating debriefing styles that don't leave people angry and frustrated and resistant to change. So I think all of this is important to try to develop simulations that do transformation 2, that get people into the tacit knowledge form so that they can start building expertise. What happens if you have to train large numbers of people? What do you do then? And so there's another method I'd like to tell you about, and it's called a ShadowBox method. And it was developed by a friend of mine, Neil Heinz, who's a New York Fire Department battalion chief. He just retired. And he developed this at a stint that he did when he got a master's at the Naval Postgraduate School. And he was struck, his area was asymmetrical events, terrorist attacks like 9/11, earthquakes, hurricanes, things like that, that many firefighters aren't trained for, but every now and then are called upon to handle. So how do you develop the right kind of training? You have a few experts who can give guidance. The trouble with experts is that they're costly and they're not always available. So how can you make this kind of training scale up and make it more available to a wider set of people? Because expertise is a limited substance and quantity. Can you get beyond the bottleneck of having to rely on expert facilitators? So Neil's method was to come up with scenarios. He created complex scenarios, and then he would have trainees go through the scenarios, and at a certain point they would stop, and there would be decision points. What are your options here? What are your priorities? What are you watching? And they had a finite set of answers, and they had to put their answers in a box and just record what it was that they were watching. And they had to put the rationale, why they filled it out that way. That was the way it went. And there was a variety of probes that you can use in this ShadowBox exercise. At the same time, Neil recruited a panel of subject matter experts to go through the same material, and the experts filled out the same options, the way they saw it, and their rationale. And then for training, Neil made the responses of the experts available to the trainee. And the power of that is that if you're a trainee, you're starting to see the world through the eyes of the expert. And the experts don't have to be there. You don't need expert facilitators in the room. The experts are there through the responses they have given to the same scenario, so you get to look at their rationale and say, I never thought about that. I never realized that. That's something for me to keep an eye on. And so it's a way of trying to change the mindset of the trainee through by seeing how the experts are viewing it. Let me give you an example. This is an example that comes from a project that we're doing for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They wanted us to evaluate it. And I'm going to give you a scenario. It's a Dodd's Cafe. So you're someplace in the Middle East, and you're part of a team that's patrolling an area. And there's a cafe. This guy at Dodd has got his cafe. He's a buddy of yours. You always go in. He's always making fun of your ears or something like that. And you make fun of how fat he is. And, you know, he gives you a hug. He's happy to see you. It's a good relationship. And your bosses tell you, you know, we hear that there is some militia maybe moving into the area. Go over to Dodd's Cafe and see what you can learn. See what he can tell you that he's heard. So you and your crew go into a Dodd's Cafe. And you walk in, and there's a Dodd. He's the guy on the red on the other side of the table, and he's on the other side of the table because unlike what he usually does, he hasn't rushed out to meet you. He hasn't given you a hug. He hasn't done any of those things. He sort of looks up like, oh, here comes another customer. I wonder what's going to happen here. And you look around, and there are some strange people at a table you've never seen before. And to make matters worse, they're not looking at you. Because in this world, you know, there'll be a lot of curiosity. They're carefully not looking at you. So now it's a different situation. What do you do? Okay? Here are your options. You've got 4 options about what you can do. First one, you can say, this is a scary situation. I don't know what, I've got some potential militia. We may be in danger. I've got to maintain security. I want to back out of there, weapons drawn so that we don't get hurt. A second option is I can just sort of sit down and let the situation clear out, and maybe a Dodd will talk to us. A third one is sit down and maybe watch a Dodd and see if I can tell who he's scared of by his body language and where he's looking. And the fourth option is pretend you don't know a Dodd and try to get you and your troops out of the cafe as quickly as possible. Those are your options. You don't have a lot of time. What do you do? Those are your options. You've got to fill into the box. How many people went for the first option? Back your crew out, your troops out with weapons raised. Raise your hand if that was the option that you selected. I can't see you, so I assume some people are raising your hand. How many people put the second one? Tactfully clear the cafe of patrons and then conduct the interview in safety without anybody there. How many picked that as your option? Again, I can't see, but I'm trusting hands are going up. The third one is sit down, watch a dot, see if you can figure out who the bad guys are and bring them in for questioning. How many raised your hand for that? Okay. Then the fourth one is just break off, pretend you don't know a dot, and try to get out as quickly as possible. How many would raise your hand for that? Okay, for the military, coming back from Iraq and Baghdad and Afghanistan, self-protection is really critical. And so most of the military that we interview, that we provide this exercise for, go for option one because that's the safest thing. They know they're in some danger, and they want to minimize the danger, and that's the thing that's the action that will minimize the danger. But here's what our panel of experts wrote, and our panel of experts included some special forces operators. They said it's option 4. They said, you're not in any danger. There's the 4 of you. You've got rifles, you've got guns, you've got grenades, there's 4 of you, you're standing. You're calling the shots. Don't overreact about safety. Whose safety are you worried about? You're worried about Adad's safety, aren't you? Because he's the vulnerable guy in this position. If you give him away, if you pretend that he's your buddy, now all of a sudden he's going to be looked at differently by the militants. So you don't want to give him away. And you know that you're not going to give him away. Do your crew members know that? Most likely they don't. And so you want to get them out of the way, and that's why you want to leave as quickly as possible. So that's how you try to break mental models, by giving expert feedback. Last example I want to give you is a project we're doing with diabetes self-management education. The goal is to try to do a better job, because right now we're not doing a great job with diabetes self-management. And the existing programs are very rule-based, not very effective. And so the leader of this team, Helen Altman Klein, did a number of cognitive task analyses to try to find out what are the secrets of people who are effective at diabetes self-management. And she found that a lot of people that just passively did what they were supposed to and were not effective. There were some people who took the initiative to try to gain expertise. And so this was turned, their knowledge was turned into a Transformation 2 training program to try to create better mental models in people with type 2 diabetes so that they can take the initiative. You know, people with diabetes, they're told if there's a spike in blood glucose, that's a bad thing. So you want to avoid that spike. But every now and then it happens. What we found is that some of the really skilled ones would say, if I see a spike in diabetes in my blood glucose, I become a detective. What did I do for the last 6 or 8 hours that would have led to this spike? And they try to revise their behavior. They try to use it as a chance to learn how to do a better job. And so they're building better mental models. They're learning how their body reacts. They're trying to improve their performance. And this team of researchers is going to start evaluation trials for the program shortly with Baylor Health Center. So last slide. How do you do Transformation 2, the path to adaptive expertise? The first thing is to realize what you're trying to do with this kind of Transformation 2 concept is help people revise their mental model and get insights based on it. They want to be able to help people get insights and know how to personalize the mental model. It's one thing to say, if you're somebody with diabetes, you're supposed to get exercise, but how much exercise should I get? What is going to matter for me so that it has an effect on my blood glucose? I have to learn that by tracking myself. Second, my mindset is about reframing. It's about coming up with better ideas. There's a shift in professional identity that you're trying to give people. For Dodd's Cafe, we're trying to change the professional identity of the soldiers from self-protection trumps everything to there's ways of dealing with the civilian populace that won't make them hate you and fear you. And there's techniques for doing that. A third thing is anticipating difficulty. With the diabetics, they were able to say, this could go wrong. In the next week, we had an obstacle course. Where would your blood glucose spikes occur? And they could say, at this point, I'm going to be at this party, I'm going to dinner. They knew where it was going to happen so they could prepare themselves and try to prevent this from going on, thinking about an obstacle course event. There's workarounds that people can perform as they develop expertise at Transformation 2. For example, tricks for treats. There was one guy who told the researchers, he said, let's be honest, I love buffalo wings. I need buffalo wings. Life without buffalo wings may not be worth living. And I know they're bad for me. I know I shouldn't have them. But I'm not ready to stop there. So I tested myself, and I found if I have 5 buffalo wings, I get a spike, all right? But if I only have 3, then I don't get a spike. So now I can go out with friends, I can have 2 or 3 buffalo wings, not endanger myself, and not feel, bitter at what life has dealt me. Issues about the use of exercise. We can tell people exercise is important, but somebody at Transformation 2 has the right kind of mental model. A woman told my wife, here's what I found. I found I would get a spike in blood glucose every time my daughter-in-law was coming to visit. Okay. Because, there's stress and fight and flight and all of that, so you're getting yourself ready, the glucose is there. So she said, I've learned whenever my daughter-in-law has a visit scheduled, before she comes, I go for a 30-minute walk. And I just take that into account so that I'm ready for it and I don't have such a strong reaction. And so what we're talking about here is the ability to develop expertise and tacit knowledge and workarounds that allow people to have richer mental models using simulation in healthcare. Now, I'm talking about Transformation 2, and I know that some of you are already doing what I've called Transformation 2. So I hope my talk has given you a few ideas that you can put into practice and affirms your own judgment in taking it that far. I suspect others of you are doing Transformation 2 and you have gone far beyond what I'm describing here. And I'm hoping you will send me emails with all your good ideas because you have learned through your own practice how to make this more effective. But I think there might be some of you who are primarily using simulation in healthcare at the Transformation 1 level with facts and rules and procedures. And I'd like to encourage you to think about how you can move into Transformation 2 to try to help your patients, your physicians, and your trainees gain expertise. I hope it works out for you. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much for a fascinating and thought-provoking presentation. So thank you. So this concludes this morning's session. Please enjoy today's events, make connections, and most of all, have fun.